Hello and welcome to the Quickstarter Italian. Here we're going to face some of the probably sharpest variations from the whole course. And that's why it's very important, of course, to know them. So just studying the Quickstarter would be enough to start playing the lines, but obviously it's better to dive into the rest of the lines which are in the course. So Italian game is starting after e4, e5. We have the boss king's pawn in the center now. Knight comes to f3, challenging our pawn on e5. We are replying with knight to c6, defending the pawn. Bishop c4, and after knight f6, here is a position which is the starting position of Italian with a bishop on c4. We're going for the knight f6 variation, even though there is a bishop c5 opportunity just developing. Those lines are going to get, less dangerous, less sharp, less open, and just it's going to be a slow play. But knight f6 move is already implying that we want to go for the d5 in some lines. We are challenging the pawn on e5, on e4. But also, as a drawback, we are allowing knight jump to g5. So this move is very good because we are having all these threats, but bad because, or not bad, but it just allows knight g5. So for that reason, we have to know also the knight's attack in Italian game. So for that reason, we have to see, okay, d3. Okay, there are also some other rare moves which white could play, but the main one is d3 in this line, and after d5, ed knight d5. We're going to get this position. This is going to be our key position. Knight b6 is not the main move. The main move is the bishop e7 in this line, but knight b6 is also very nice, immediately asking the bishop where will it go, to b3 or to b5. And according to where does the bishop go, we're going to understand. If the bishop goes to b3, it's going to target the pawn on f7. If bishop goes to b5, which is considered to be more challenging, white is going to put pressure on the e5 pawn. And the other lines which we'll look into are the knight's attack with a knight g5. Here we go for d5. This is kind of the only move here. And after knight a5, bishop b5, c6, polarity defense, and after pawn takes, there are a few moves which white can go for, like passively bishop a4, bring the bishop back to e2, or d3 the main line, or queen f3. So we are going to cover all those moves. So let's start first. So again, starting position of the Italian, developing the bishop to c4, and we're going for knight f6, as mentioned earlier. We're challenging the pawn on e4, e5, e4. Also ready to go for the d5, and yeah, for that reason. But we also, again, we are allowed knight g5. For here, we're going to look mainly into the Italian game without the knight attack. So let's say if white is playing knight c3, then where white is inviting us to take on e4 and create this very nice d5 trick. So after knight e4, either knight takes or not, we're going to transpose to the Scotch Scotch line. So you can find the rest in the Scotch Quickstarter. d4, if white is breaking the center with the d4, again, after take, we are transposing to the Scotch Gambit in this position. So you can also find the rest of the lines in the Scotch Gambit. In the Scotch Quickstarter. If castle is played, this happens a lot in the online games, but it's not at all, I mean, it's not bringing any problems for us, and we can already consider taking on e4, because after knight takes e4, it feels like rook e1 is a great move. But okay, let's first look at other moves, like bishop d5 is stopping the d5 option. Here we go with knight back to f6, attacking the bishop. Even though white is regaining back the pawn, we have an opportunity to castle, and we have also a bishop pair here. So it's a great position for black. In case of d4 break, we have d5 intermediate. First of all, we are defending our knight on e4, and we're attacking the bishop on c4. Bishop b5 trying to put more pressure on the pawn on e5 by pinning the knight. So we're taking on d4, queen takes, and now queen d7. This is very unusual move. We are unpinning ourselves with the queen, and basically, yeah, now we are continuing our development of the bishop. For example, after queen a4, here we play knight c5, already challenging the queen. And the next move, we are playing bishop b7 and short castle with no problems. Rook e1 is the most common move, trying to put the pressure on knight on e4 and pawn on e5. But here we are going with a d5 as planned, attacking the bishop and defending our knight on e4. So here, bishop b5, again putting pressure on the pawn on e5 via the spin. Bishop c5, we're developing and counter-attacking, so we were not even caring about the pawn on e5. d4, white is trying to stop our activity, so here we have to take on d4. After knight takes castle, bishop c6, trying to win the pawn, but the problem is that here we have an intermediate move, and the fastest way to win the game, since after knight f2, king f2, we have queen f6, attacking king and the knight on d4. King comes to g1, here queen d4, and after queen takes, bishop takes, king h1, b pawn takes on c6. Basically, we're just having 2 extra pawns and completely winning endgame. So that was this line. Now we're moving to the other interesting line, so with queen on e2. The main point of this move is to protect the pawn on e4 without playing d3, so that white would have opportunity to push immediately for d4. But yeah, it's not really going to work pretty well because also location of the queen on e2 is a bit strange. So bishop c5, we're just developing to the most active square. Here, bishop f7, there is like one trick, but okay, it's a bad move. So king f7, now queen c4. White is attacking the king and the bishop, and now we go for d5. That's very important to remember. Since after queen c5, knight e4, queen e3, we have just rook e8, and we have a center. We're going to continue with king g8, hiding the king on the king side, and we are having the very nice center with a d and e pawns, so already clearly better position. Knight comes to g5 here. It's a little bit strange. It was rather better to play knight g5 earlier. And here I mean, it's important to know that if we castle, which feels like the most natural move, after knight f7, rook f7, bishop f7, king f7, this threat of queen c4 is still there, and we are actually going to be in the trouble. For that reason, we have to include knight d4, knight d4 intermezzo, attacking the queen and the pawn. So if queen goes to d3, now we go d5, e5, and bishop f5, attacking the queen, and the problem on c2 is going to decide the game. If bishop goes to f7, taking with intermezzo a check, king comes to f8, and now basically we attack so many squares. We are taking the queen, the pawn on c2, and h6 is a threat also in the position. Queen comes to d3, then we go h6, c3, we grab the knight, pawn takes, we take, and after bishop b3, d5, and basically even though white didn't lose material, we are getting completely winning position because white cannot finish the development, and okay, also castling is a bit problematic with the rook on h8. Queen c4, trying to hold the bishop on f7, but here after queen e7, we are threatening to go h6 ourselves and kicking the knight from h6 and take the bishop on f7. Before trying to attack our bishop b6, and after a4 we have a5, and again h6 is a huge threat and pretty much unavoidable. So now again we're getting this position, and now we are moving into the main lines already. d3. D3 move is pretty much open and pretty much common. And the point here is that what white wants to do, white wants to play a slow Italian game, gioco piano, quiet game, but we are not letting them do it, and we are immediately going with the d5, which is the most direct way, and already asking a lot of questions. So of course, white takes on d5, knight takes, and we're getting the position where we have slight advantage in the center due to the more space with a pawn on e5. So here there are a few rare moves. So in case of bishop g5, which would attack our queen, we're just going for f6. Anyway, we wanted later to play this move to defend the pawn on e5. The bishop takes on d5, which is also strange to trade the bishop like this, but it's pretty, it's actually being played quite often. So queen d5, knight c3, and queen d6. Basically, in the next move, we are ready to play bishop f5 or bishop g4 and castle long. So again, getting good positions. Also 2 bishops, by the way. And knight c3 is not really dangerous because here we have to know that we have continued with bishop e6 to develop and defend on d5. Here knight g5 could be challenging, so attacking our bishop, but it's just going to lead to simplification, since after knight c3, knight e6, knight d1, we're going to trade the queens, and after knight e5, we're just getting a bishop on the light squared bishop, because it's not possible to hide with a bishop, so after trading it, we're getting an equal endgame. The c3, so white wants to go at some moment d4, also blocking the d4 and the b4 squares, but it doesn't make sense in this line, since after knight b6, basically the only move which we have to know, and we will see also the main lines, which in comparison to this move, white just spent the extra tempo on c6, which didn't make any sense at all. h3, white is stopping bishop g4, but it was not yet a threat, so we go for bishop f5, and in the next move we're ready to play queen d7 with a long castle. So since white didn't castle and spend this time for h3, we have time to be actually ambitious. Knight goes to g5 with a threat of attacking the f7 square by queen f3 or queen h5. I mean, this is probably the trickiest among all this rare move. Here we have to go f6, very important, because now there is not going to be any sacrifice on f7, and basically, if we would play something like bishop e7, we always have to count for knight f7. Knight e4, jumping back, now bishop e6, we're just developing and defending, and we can be ready at some moment to go queen d7 and long castle. Okay, queen f3, trying to put pressure on d5 in exchange of take on g5. Of course, we go knight d4 first, attacking the queen. And after queen takes bishop b5, we have knight c2. And after king d1, knight e1, this knight is still under attack, and well, we're just having a completely winning position because we have more material and we have chances later to get away with the knight from a1. Knight c3, it's actually a very nice idea here from white, because in this position it's very easy to go wrong as black, so we have to know correct move here, which is actually not so difficult. So if we take on c3, knight c3, then now after bishop f7 check, we cannot really go king e7, since after king e7 there is bc, and black cannot really take the knight. And the problem, of course, is that after take there is bishop g5. And if king goes to d7, which feels like a better option, but now after bc, fg is played, and after queen g4 we're just playing king e7, but the problem is that now bishop g5 is also coming, queen went away to f3, it's not under attack anymore, and bishop g5 is a huge threat while bishop is defended. So yeah, it's not really working out. So we have to know the move here, which is bishop b4. Very logical. We're pinning the knight on c3. Now we can already castle, and we also target the knight on a5, on g5. So knight goes back to e4, very logically also defends the knight on c3. Now bishop e6, completing development, castle, and we're just having equal position with maybe some slight advantage due to the pawn on e5. For that, we have more space in the center. I would prefer here black for sure. Now we're again getting to this d3, d5 variation. So pawn takes, knight takes. And now queen e2. This is one of the most challenging continuation here for black in this variation. So white is immediately asking a question to the pawn on e5. The problem here is if we go for a natural move bishop g4 after h3, we would have to give up our bishop or lose the e5 pawn. Since after bishop f3 queen takes, we would already have no bishops, so white would have bishop pair advantage. And after bishop h5, g4 can be followed, and after bishop g6, knight e5, and after some exchanges, there is not going to be much compensations for the extra pawn for white. So f6, very important, we're defending the pawn on e5. It's actually pretty logical. Also, it's cutting some squares from the knight. The knight cannot jump on g5 any longer. But also, we're playing many times this f6 move when we support the pawn on e5. So that's why this move, I don't think it's so hard to remember. Castle, white is continuing to castle, and there are already some options to go for d4. Now, knight b6. We are attacking the bishop, and we don't want to have our knight lose on d5. So here, bishop b3, just removing the bishop. But now it's a little bit, it's of course problematic to play castle. But okay, we definitely could go for the long castle. So we don't necessarily have to go for short castle. And the other point is that the f7 square is not there anymore, so it's tough to challenge it, which is normally the main idea of this bishop on b3. Now bishop g4, now we can pin finally. Bishop e3, queen e7, and we're finishing our development, following it up with a long castle. And yeah, this looks very good. Queen on e7 looks a little bit strange. It may look so, but actually it's a standard square where the queen goes in this variation. So later you will also see other lines with a queen there. Bishop goes to b5, trying to put pressure on this knight and potentially this pawn, but for now it's defended. Now we go bishop d6, defending the pawn. That's also a typical move in the structures. d4, white try to put an enormous amount of pressure on e5, and by pinning also our knight. So here we're going for castle, finishing development. We're not afraid of any take on e5, since if white is just taking on e5 after knight e5, knight e5, bishop e5, black doesn't really have any problems, and the next move, bishop f5, will follow with an absolutely equal position. So here, bishop takes c6, white is trying to win the pawn. Fe happens, yeah, and basically, okay, just a quick reminder about this pawn structure. So yes, white is spoiling pawn structure for us. We have double c pawns, we have isolated e pawn, but we have a bishop pair and a big activity and potential attack on the king side, because due to the rook on f8, due to potential, like we can bring the queen to the let's say e8, g6, h5. It depends what we're going to attack, and bishop to g4 and so on. So also d5 square pretty important for the knight. So there are definitely a big ideas in the position. So we have to play dynamically this one. Knight goes to b2, to d2, and then now queen e8. We're already ready to bring the queen, and okay, now we're also defending on e5 in the position. Bishop g5, knight d5, queen g6 are definitely next moves which we would like to play and continue the attack. If knight takes on e5, white is being greedy. We are playing queen e7, trying to pin since the queen on e2 is undefended, and after rook e1 we have queen h4. Now we're putting pressure on the f2, and it looks like that the pawn is just defended, but the problem is the threat to take on e5 is there now. So f4 has to be played, but after bishop a6, we are creating a threat, since queen cannot take our bishop because of the problem on the rook on e1. So we are already getting a clear advantage in this position. So now again, we're going for this line. So knight d6, queen e2, f6, very important to defend now. d4, white is pushing forward immediately here, putting pressure on the e5. Now we go for bishop g4. Now it's the only way to keep the pawn, since the problem here is after h3, it will blunder a pawn on d4 with knight d4. So it's not happening. And after pawn takes on e5, we have knight takes e5, and we are pretty comfortably equalized in this position. Queen e4, trying to double attack. But after bishop f3, which is also defending the knight on d5, pawn takes, knight b6, very important tempo on the bishop, and bishop now has to move. So if bishop goes to e2, we have queen d5, offering a trade to the queens, and we're at least equal. And after bishop b3, we go queen d7. We are not afraid of f4, because if f4 is played, we have long castle, and already we have a threat of the checkmate, so knight is actually not hanging. If king of queen b7, white wants to stop us from the long castle. Here we are going for bishop b4, and we're already having such a great development, attacking the king, and actually it's white who has to be really careful. Knight c3, now c5. The idea is, of course, to offer the trade to the queens, and after queen trade, we're getting enormous endgame with all the active pieces and some weaknesses for white. So yeah, definitely a compensation for the pawn, and most likely we will win back the pawn pretty soon. All right, so now we're moving into the main lines. So here after knight e5, castle so far is the best move and the main move. So now white wants not to have the queen on e2, but the rook on e2, with the same idea, like creating a pressure on e5, like queen d on from e2. So here important we go for knight b6. It's a very interesting move. Again, I was a bit saying about this move earlier. The point here is that white is usually black is usually going for e7, bishop e7 move, especially on the top level. But knight b6, even though it's not the most popular move, this move is pretty good, and immediately asking the bishop where does it want to go and where, so that there are no both ideas of bishop b5 and b3, but that he cannot really cover both diagonals. So bishop b3 is less critical, I would say, and a bit more easier to handle for us. So here important is if we cannot continue the normal developments, and after bishop d6, knight g5 is coming with attack on f7 and also h7, and we think, okay, we can short castle and defend. But after queen h5, we don't have a knight on f6 anymore, which would defend everything, so we're just going to lose this position. So bishop g4 is very important. Now we have to take care of all the knight g5 jumps, and we are ready to finish development with queen e7 and long castle. h3, trying to ask the question to our bishop, so that it doesn't want to take or go back. Of course, we are keeping the bishop, we don't give it up. And now after h3, there are already ideas of knight e5 tricks if our queen is on d7. So rook e1, and now very important that we are not putting the queen, putting queen to d7, because it enables ideas of knight coming to e5, especially considering our queen is our bishop is undefended on h5. And for example, if we go queen f6, it's also not good, because after g4, bishop g6, knight c3, and we have some problems with castling because bishop g5 is coming and the pawn, I mean, not actually the pawn, but the rook rather on d8 will be a problem. So queen e7 is a move. We're defending the pawn on e5, and at the same time ready to castle and finish the development. d4. White is trying to break our pawn using the pin on the queen and the king. So now we castle. Now it's actually a funny situation where both rooks are x-raying. So a4. Yeah, it looks like a right moment to play e4, because if we play e5, which we kind of have to do, white would say, okay, that's going to be more difficult to castle long, but actually not so much, because after knight c3, castle, knight b5. This knight is beautiful on b5, but it's not really targeting anything, so we can continue our normal play with playing f6, and then we are ready to go with a g5, g4, since it's a hook here on g4, and yeah, just continue attack on the king side. In case of g4 here, it looks pretty logical to try to go for the e5 pawn. We go bishop g6 back, and now d4 again, long castle, and we don't have issues because our rook is x-raying and the rook of the white. So here queen e2, attacking and putting more pressure on our e5 pawn. Here after f6, basically here already long castle is possible, but we would have to know like good compensation lines, but we can just defend the pawn on e5, since after d4 now we long castle, and now if white is taking on e5, we have a very nice move h5, immediately starting an attack against the white's king. So here if white is taking another pawn on f6, we're trading the queens. Yes, we're trading the queens, because even though we're currently 2 pawns down, we trade the queens, because after hg, if hg happens, after rook d1, rook e1, bishop e4, There is just a checkmate on h1, which is unstoppable due to our open h file. So the position is actually so bad. So white has to try with fg, bishop takes. Now, basically with the bishop taking, then it's going, white would try to avoid the mating attack. So bishop e6 check. Now bishop wants to take on g4, blocking the file for the rook. But after rook d1, rook e1, we can still take on c1, because after rook takes, there is bishop b2 and then bishop c2. And okay, if rook is taken, we can take the other one. And okay, we're going to get endgame pretty funny, actually, because we have 3 pawns and 3 pawns for white. And the point is that we're going to have protected, not protected, but connected passers. White will have more separate. And okay, generally speaking, our protected passer should be definitely more dangerous. So I would say that we have big chances as black. So now again, we are going for this line. So castle happens, knight b6, and now we're going to see what's happening after this critical line of bishop to b5. This is actually a critical test because it's coming with immediate threat of taking on e5. So we have to play bishop d6. Now, of course, we're not afraid of any knight g5, since f7 square is completely fine and unattacked. So d4 is leading actually to the forcing play after e4. Now, if knight g4, knight g5, we're just castling, and the problem is that after knight e4, we can take on d4. The trick is that queen cannot take because of the bishop h2. So bishop takes c6 has to be played, bc, and then knight e4. But now we have bishop h2, and after this take, we gain back the pawn, and king's position of white is actually a bit weaker, I would say. In case of rook e1, which feels the most natural, we have already f5 move, and there is no other way to defend the pawn. So if d5, white is trying to go, we actually shouldn't worry about this d5, because this d5 is coming, but it's not really working out because we're always having some ideas, since after knight d5, queen cannot capture, and there is going to be again the bishop to h2. So bishop g5 trying to attack our queen. Here we have to move the queen, and bishop e7 would be also fine, but queen d7 is the best move. Self-pinning in a way, but it's actually quite fine. White is going for c4, wants to push for d5 anyway. Now we castle, and again, in this line, even though there are so many threats now to trying to win our pieces, we actually shouldn't worry, because, for example, after c5, we can take the knight already. Knight is already can be taken on f3. If cd happens, we take with the queen, and yeah, basically we don't have crazy position. And after pawn takes on b6, we're playing h6, forcing the bishop going back, and we're just going to take it in the next move. So bishop h4, and after f4, we are ready to trap the bishop on h4. So that was the one of the variations. Now we're going for bishop b6, bishop d6, rook e1, yes. f6, and here d4. So this is a different line. Now starting with the rook e1, so that pawn is not on e4 anymore. Now f6, we have to defend, and d4. White puts a maximum amount of pressure, and now e5 pawn is a problem. Castle, in case of pawn takes on e5, knight e5, knight e5. We're trading, and okay, here taking on e5 was happening in a couple of games, but actually taking with a pawn makes more sense in this pawn structure. So even though we're creating isolated pawns to ourselves, we're opening the f file. And yeah, generally this pawn structure, even though it may feel like this pawn structure feels like better, but the e6 square is going to be weak all the time due to this f6 plate. So yeah, so now knight c3, and now bishop f5. Basically, we are developing, and we are targeting the e4 square for the bishop. So for the knight, sorry, knight e4. Now bishop b4, attacking the queen, offering the trade. And before white could stabilize the position, we are just hitting all the pieces, and we are just having good lines from here. If bishop takes on c6, this is actually the more critical approach, basically giving up us the bishop pair advantage, but leaving us with a very bad pawn structure. So if knight takes on e5 here, it's a trick because after bishop e5 we're just winning. White cannot really take anything. Oops, here, nothing is actually working. So knight bd2, trying to develop the knight and also aiming for the e4 square. Here we go bishop g4, pinning the other knight. So now if this knight is going to move, we're going to stress already to take on f3. So queen e2, bishop h5, very nice prophylactical move. We're just preventing all the ideas, since we want to go for knight d5 and white would hit our bishop with h3. So now queen e4, knight d5, and we have a very good position. We can continue bringing our pieces closer to the center, queen f6, rook a2 e8, and just having a nice middle game. h3 is a very interesting move and very commonly played. White is stopping all bishop g4 ideas, so now we cannot go for it, but we can play e4 here. So we're giving up a pawn and not saying, saying we're not going to get any more this blockade, and the bishop is opening up. Knight g5, white wants to take, obviously. Queen f6, attacking the pawn on f2. So knight takes is pretty logical, also targeting both the bishop and the queen. And now queen g6, we are offering already queen, not offering, but introducing bishop h3 in the position. King h1, but after bishop e6, we are just preparing to bring last piece in the position, and we have a very nice compensation for the pawn. Also, pawn on f2 is going to be weak, and yeah, attack against the white's king will be also crucial in this middle game. The next position, again, we are reaching the same rook e1, d4 from white, takes. Again, we are reaching this position, and here bishop g5, probably the most serious try for white to advantage, but here we go queen e8. Now we have very nice squares on the light squares g6 and h5 to put pressure on the king. So knight c3, this is just not working because bishop g4, rook e3, and queen h5, and pretty much lost on f3 square. If knight bd2, again, we develop our bishop to g4 with attack. So now knight again cannot really move from d2 because we are always putting pressure on f3. And after h3, bishop f3, we normally don't really want to give up bishops easily, but okay, we can follow up now with the e4. And yeah, basically now if knight is moving anywhere, our queen is coming to e5, and big problems on the king side for white. So yeah, there are already a couple of difficult moves which white has to find, which are pretty not easy. All right, now we go again to this line, so bishop d6. Now, what happens if bishop c6? Immediately, objectively, it's the strongest continuation for white, take. And okay, here if rook e1, f6, it would just transpose to the line which we discussed, so it doesn't make so much sense, or independent value. So knight e5, bishop e5, this is actually the point of white. So not waiting for us to play f6 and allow us to have the f file, but rather to take immediately. So after bishop takes, now rook e1 and queen e7. Now very few games actually have this position, but it's both normal continuations pretty much okay for black. So we're supporting the bishop. Now, of course, f4 is a big question, and d4. And the point here is after f4, we have a very nice move of bishop d4, attacking the king. So now king has to move, and we have the time to bring the other bishop. So here the key in the position is this dark squared bishop. We allow, of course, f5 can be played. White is taking the bishop on e6 instead of the bishop on e5, so dark squared bishop. So for that reason, we castle. Pawn takes, and now knight d5. We don't really have to rush to take here, but rather we can build up pressure against the king on the king side, and definitely huge attack is incoming in a couple of moves. Anyway, the f file is going to get open, so even if white takes or if we take, it doesn't really matter. So what happens? Well, d4 is another option, but after d4 we just have bishop h2, and we don't really have to bother about the pawn structure anymore. I mean, not really. I mean, the pawn structure is weak, but I would say that position of white's king is weaker because there is no defender on h2. And the strongest move in the position is actually king h1. So not pushing d4 and f4, but rather threatening to push it. This is a very difficult move to find, but it's possible. So we have to know what to play here. So we castle, and after f4, we play f6. Takes. And this is how the line starts. Okay, there is already continuation. There are more lines from here, obviously. But the main point is going to be that white will try to put the knight on e4, and we will try to take it. Try to take it from e4. Meanwhile, fighting for the f2 square. This is going to be our key ideas to kind of stabilize and get okay, sometimes equality, sometimes attack. So yeah, definitely not so bad for black, but we have to be careful. So now we are moving into the more crazy lines, since after knight f6, knight g5 becomes very much possible. So here d5 is the only move. Pawn takes and knight e5, area defense. We are going to look at the rare move like d3. Okay, it's alternative to the bishop b5, but it's not so can get not so sharp, as I would say bishop b5 is sharper. So it makes not possible taking on d5, since after knight d5 there is queen f3. So here h6, we're attacking the knight and asking it to go back. So knight goes back to f3, and now we actually can go to e4, since the pawn has to defend the bishop on c4. This attack again is possible. In case of knight d4, we can just easily regain the pawn back after bishop c5, c3, castle, just take on d3 and take back on d5. And we're actually having more active position, more active pieces. In case of queen e2, white is trying to keep the defense on the bishop on c4. Already queen, or not queen e4, but take on e4 is a threat, and pinning our king, obviously. So here we take the bishop, pawn takes, and now again our pawn is defended on f3. So bishop c5 we're playing, and we're stopping ideas of knight jumping to d4. So knight goes to d2 and wants to attack our bishop from the b3 square. So we castle knight b3. Now we have an intermediate bishop g4, which is very important. Now, basically, the only good square for the queen to go is on f1, which would stop the castle, since after queen d2, we're going for e3, and after knight e4, I mean, we're just going to win in the next moves after queen h4. Queen f1, already a very good move, because the king is now king is having issues since it's blocked in the center. Bishop b4, we're giving a check, and okay, of course, if white is playing c3, then pieces are going to be messed up. But in case of bishop d2, we're just going to take, and after rook e8, e3 is kind of incoming, and we are much better. So that was this. In case of c3, knight c3, we just can play c6 and putting an enormous amount of pressure on white. If c3 is played, again, it's of course the only kind of move which has to be played, but then the square is not for the knight any longer, which would be ideal there. So bishop e7, we are bringing the bishop back. The point is that we are going to have the pressure on the d5 pawn with the queen, and generally we would like to relocate our knight from f6. So on f6, knight would be actually in the good position, since white most likely will castle long. So h3, bishop h5, g4, white is trying to create an attack, and we go for bishop g6. In the next move, we will relocate the knight to e5, since the f3 and d3 squares are super weak. So now again, we're getting into this position. We get to this position. And here now we're going to the main kind of line with bishop b5. Now c6, dc, pawn takes. And here there are many different moves. We're going to start with the most passive and the worst one, bishop a4. Well, yeah, I mean, it's actually fourth most common move to play this position. So it's definitely can be met. So you can meet this move, but it's definitely not critical. So here we immediately target the knight. So that's our main point in this variation. So we give up a pawn, but we are gaining a lot of advantage by development, by time. We're winning the time tempo by tempo, and our pieces should be more active, and we have to get lead in the development. Knight f3 and now e4. Now knight has to go. In case knight goes to e5, then we go already queen d4, and that's kind of the main idea, that we already win the piece so early on. So bishop c6, knight c6, and after knight c6, queen c5, the knight is just trapped. If queen goes to e2, trying to pin us, and bishop e6, we are unpinning, and after knight e5, we have again queen d4, and there is no real choice but take on c6, knight takes. So here, if knight takes, queen c5, that's very good that we played bishop. We placed bishop on e6, but not on e7. So that's advantage, because in this position, knight would take on e7. We would not have, we would not win the knight. So here, bishop c8 after queen a4, bishop d7. We are just winning the knight. So queen b5, trying to create some, pinning the knight and creating some threats. So we play bishop c5. The idea is we're attacking the knight on e5 and we're attacking the pawn on f2 without caring about our bishop on our knight on c6. So queen c6, king e7, and after queen b7, we go king d6, and either white is going to lose the knight or the pawn on f2 and g2, and huge chances to get checkmated as white. Now we're getting this position, okay, c6. And now bishop e2 is one of the main moves in this position, looks like very natural. The only thing is this move is not stopping the d4 idea, the e4 idea, sorry. So now h6, king and knight comes to h3, and it looks like a pretty crazy move, but the problem is that white wants to stop us from pushing e4 if white goes to f3. So that's why white goes for the h3 square. But here, very important move which we have to play is a g5, because if we're not playing this move, white would castle, bring the king to h1, and the knight would be relocated to f3 square. So for that reason, we have to start with this move, since after castle, g5 would be already the move immediately, and we would trap the knight on h3. So d3, white is trying to continue development, and now queen comes to b6, targeting the pawn on f2, also putting some pressure on b2, and okay, there are also still ideas of g4, knight c3. Knight now is relocating to the c5 or d6 squares. Basically, this g4 idea is not really working now because there could be some knight a5 after bishop c5. So generally, we have this idea of playing g4 and placing the bishop to c5, attacking the b2 pawn, but for now it's not really working out. So now knight e4, de, and now bishop e6. Now we have a great position. All right, now white, now even though it feels like white can castle, white actually cannot, because before white couldn't castle due to the g4 move, since white would just take it here. In this position, after castle, we have rook d8, the tempy move attacking the queen, and after queen e1, now we can go for it, and now the knight is trapped and we are winning. So again, this bishop e2 line, h6, attacking the knight, knight goes to f3, and now e4. That's kind of what they don't like about the knight f3 move, but okay, knight comes to e5, and now bishop c5. We are ready to bring our queen to d4, targeting the knight and the pawn on f2, so white has to defend and goes for castle. Now queen d6. We're continuing the development of our pieces and attacking the pieces of white. Now knight has to go somewhere. Where does it go? In case it goes to c4, white is going to lose control from the g4 square. Now after knight c4, bishop c4, knight g4, and already some big problems. So g3 is the only way to stop the checkmate. Out after knight f2, rook f2, queen d4 check, and we're just taking the material. We are up in exchange and getting winning position. So just amazing. d4 is the only move. Actually, white has to give back the pawn to get equality. After queen d4, bishop takes. Knight c4, trade happens, and castle. And more or less equal positions, but okay, we are not having problems, maybe some slight space advantage here, and we can say, okay, more weak pawns on the queen side, but I don't see any issue for black, actually. Knight goes to g4. That's actually not really better than knight c4, since after bishop takes h5. Now we're going to place our knight to g4, and if white is ever going to take, we will get the h5 open. So here, if bishop goes to h3, knight g4 anyway, g3, and we can already sacrifice knight f2, rook f2, and after h4, the attack is ongoing. We're opening up the h file. Everything is going on fire. So bishop goes to e2, going back. Now knight g4 anyway. If bishop takes g4 after opening up the file, we are just getting an amazing position with a semi-open h file. So yeah, there we're going to win the game. If g3 is played, now we can sacrifice on h2. The point is after king takes, there is a bishop f2, so another sacrifice, and here we have h4 and big problems after hg, and yeah, pretty much losing position for white. So d4, white tried to open the bishop with the idea of bishop f4 to attack our queen. So here we take en passant, bishop f4, attacking the queen. Now queen e6. The idea is, of course, that we have threats in the position, attacking on e2 and f1. And after rook e1, it looks like white is actually escaping, because here after castle, in case pawn takes on d3, we just play queen h3. This is not really possible, because now, I mean, not possible for white, since after knight g4 we are kind of checkmating. In case of bishop takes on d3, we just take the rook, and after knight f3 we are gaining back material and winning. But after king h2, we take the bishop, now trade the pieces, and after rook d1, basically getting a winning endgame. Okay, white has escaped, white didn't checkmate. White didn't get checkmate, but white get issues because all the pieces on the queen side. So for that reason, we are going to win this endgame. All right. Now we're going again into this position. So e5 is played. Bishop c5 is said, and now c3. So the main idea is to prevent the queen coming to d4 and also enable ideas of b4 move. So we are going to a castle, and now the question is b4 or d4 can be tried. Let's start with d4. It's pretty suspicious because once white played with d3, the knight will not be stable on d3 at all. So if pawn would be on e2, on c2, then the knight would be defended, but now it's not so much. So bishop b6, we're keeping the bishop on this diagonal, obviously, to keep pressure on the king side. Castle, rook e8, now we're threatening already to bring our bishop out to f6, to f5, sorry, to target the knight on d3, to target the bishop on c2, very unpleasant position. Castle, queen c7, now d4, again e d4, knight d3, and now bishop d6. Now we're going back on the other diagonal because we are attacking the pawn on h2, and pretty much important to do it with the tempo. Now g3, and pawn structure already a little bit changed, so we can get some attack. And here bishop h3 is coming with usage of this weak light squares. Rook e1, rook a to d8, also x-raying the queen in a way. And yeah, again, white is under big pressure in this position. b4, it's not much as d4, but white is actually weakening a lot of squares. So here we go bishop d6, again attacking the knight. In case of d4, we take knight takes and knight c4. And knight d5, so we occupied the very weak the light squares, and we have incredible pieces in this position, and yeah, it's a huge compensation for the pawn for sure. In case of f4, then we take on f3. Now the point of white that the knight went back to f3 to defend the king side, but okay, the pawn on f2 is gone. Rook e8, pinning the king and introducing the bishop a6 idea, so white kind of has to castle. In case white is taking our knight on a5, pawn takes a5, bishop a6 now, d3, and after bishop c5, white cannot really castle, and yeah, we're just still pieces are standing, so, and due to the king in the center, we're definitely having a compensation or even better position already. Castle, now queen e7, we're attacking the bishop on e2, and yeah, basically there is only, I mean, two moves to bring the bishop away. So one move, queen bishop d3. Now queen c7. It's basically just illustrating you that the material in this position doesn't really matter. If white takes our knight, we have bishop g4, putting pressure on the knight on f3, pinning it, and also putting pressure on h2. So yeah, basically it seems like even though we're down a piece, we actually up pieces because our pieces are so active. Bishop c5 is incoming, knight h5 with all kinds of threat also, and h2 pawn is hanging. So yeah, definitely a lot of ideas for black and many active pieces. So now we're going back a little bit for another move, queen f3. White is protecting the bishop by pinning the pawn. So now we cannot take the bishop because there is a pin. So now rook b8, we are bringing the rook into the play, attacking the bishop, and now we have a threat of taking it. So now white has to do something, and the main move is, of course, taking with a bishop on c6. Since white played this queen f3, now white can take another pawn. So being a little bit greedy, knight takes, queen takes, and now knight d7, very nice tempo. We're attacking the knight, we're stopping check, attacking the knight, and defending kind of everything. So great move. d4, that's a interesting try from white, trying to open up the position completely. Here we go for bishop e7. Again, one more time attacking the knight on g5. So if knight goes back to f3, then we have rook b6. So this is one of the main ideas. So from the rook from b8, it can always be included to the 6th rank or to the 4th rank. So queen a4, castle, and now bishop b7. Knight e5, taking another pawn, take. So white is already up 3 pawns, but here rook g6, we're threatening to take on g2 already. And after f3, bishop f3, and if rook takes, queen d1, and basically position of white is already collapsed. So now we're going again for the queen f3, rook b8. So now what happens if bishop goes back, if white is not taking the pawn? The idea is that white wants to keep the knight and bring it to the e4 square. Bishop d6, first of all, we are just developing and preparing castle. Also, we're targeting the g3 square, on which queen is going many times to attack on the king side. Castle, now bishop g4, we're attacking the queen, and queen cannot really go to g3. There would be ideas of e4, so yeah, it's very good. So knight c3, white is just continuing development. Again, bishop g4. If queen goes to g3, there is already e4 can be included. Queen is3, trying to pin our king. Then after castle, knight g4. Rook e8, so we're putting enormous amount of pressure. So now we're down 2 pawns in the position. So yeah, and there is still big problems for white. Queen is3 immediately, now knight d5, we're attacking, and now there's a problem with a knight, with a queen on e3, that we have this knight d5. So if queen goes to g3, now taking on g5 would not really be good, because it would fall under the trick of knight e4, and after queen e7, knight takes, and queen takes on g4 at the end of the line. White is much better. So here f5 we would have to play, defending the bishop. Now knight is hanging on g5, and after knight e6 we have queen f6, and knight is actually trapped. So if knight takes on d5, then we take the pawns. We have already enormous center, while white has issues with the pawn and pretty awkward pieces placed on d3, e3, and g5. So queen a7, queen goes away from the square. Now bishop e7. First of all, we're stopping all kind of problems on the f7, and taking the knight would not be possible because our rook was hanging. So knight f3 now. Now e4 is a move, knight e5 coming forward. Now bishop e6. We're stopping all kind of threats. Bishop e2 goes back, and now bishop d6. This is most likely white is going to lose the knight, because it's almost trapped already on e5, and we will gain material very soon, or we will gain an attack with all the awkward pieces of the white. So now we're moving into the other line. So from this position, bishop d3 is so far the main line and the most challenging continuation for black. So here we go for knight d5, attacking the knight with the queen, using the fact that the pawn cannot move so quickly from the d2. So in case of h4 defending the knight, then we're going for the bishop d6. Bishop e7, in case of bishop e7, queen f3, and now we cannot really defend the pawn on f7 with the queen. So that's why we played bishop d6 here. Almost a novelty, was played only in one game. So queen comes to f3, now queen e7. Now this is a difference compared to the bishop on e7 variation. After castle f5, we're first of all building up a nice center, creating a threat, and this pawn on f7 is not an issue anymore. So now bishop f5, white is trying to win the pawn, not back, but the pawn. But after rook f8, white is getting into trouble. Queen h5 check, and of course white has to give up the piece for many pawns. But after king d8, the game is pretty complex. The main point of us that for us is that currently the game is very dynamic, and we have a dynamic advantage because of all our active pieces. So for that reason, we should continue the initiative and continue the attack of the whites. And because we have, of course, we have piece for 4 pawns, which if we're just going to play slowly, white is just going to win this. So we should play dynamically this position, and yeah, it's pretty sharp. So knight c3, normal developing move. Now we play h6, again targeting the knight. Knight g2, e4, and now bishop e7, removing the bishop. So now we want to kick the knight from the f4 square by playing from the e4 square by playing f5. That's kind of the main idea in the line. If knight goes to e4 immediately, now we go knight f4. And the point is that now we're attacking the bishop and the pawn on g2. And kind of white has to retreat with the bishop to f1. So after queen f3, there is just f5. And yeah, the ideas of e4 are coming later once we defend our knight. If bishop goes to f1, it's actually a pretty funny position. We're currently down 1 pawn, but white is almost all pieces are standing backwards, only knight is on e4. So we go for f5, knight goes back to g3. It would be funny if knight could go on g1 back. So now we continue our development, bishop d6, and we're ready to castle. And now d4, queen e7, and basically there are a lot of issues for white, and king is still in the center. If knight goes back to e2, and you can see already both pieces are in second rank, but okay, the knight is challenging our knight. Okay, most important that we shouldn't really trade because we go for knight e6, so we don't need to help white. Knight e6, and now d4, white is trying to open up, but after queen e7, we are kind of ready to get opened up the position because the king is going to be an issue, and there are again big problems with continuing developing the pieces, and white, yeah, the knight cannot really move from e2. This is just so bad. Okay, and now we go to the other line, so bishop d3, now again knight d5, and now knight f3. So the bishop on d3 is a great bishop is stopping e4, which is very important. And now bishop d6, we are protecting the pawn and just preparing to castle and go for f5. Castle, and if knight goes to c3, it just allows to be f5 played for free, and after bishop e2, e4, knight d4, I mean, we're just coming forward, we're attacking with every move is a tempo. Knight b3, and now queen h4, and again attacking on h2, g3, now queen h3, and ideas like f4 or knight f4 are there in the position, bringing the rook to g6 and checkmating. Knight a5 is losing to knight f4, and after gf we already have bishop h4 or bishop f4 with a checkmate incoming. Bishop f3 is going to be followed by rook f6, and yeah, basically in the next moves, rook h6 could be a move with a checkmates on the h file. That's why knight c3 is not so good. Rook e1, white is trying to prepare a square for the bishop on f1 and also targets our pawn on e4, on e5. Here we go for bishop g4. Idea, of course, is to pin the knight and go for f5, which is actually not the main move. The main move is in the line is f5. But here we wanted to find something new, and bishop g4 is very interesting because after f5 we have to be ready to continue after white would take, for example, with a knight on e5. So here we played bishop g4, and we want to play f5, obviously, because now we are pinning the knight. So h3, by far the most common move, immediately challenging our bishop, and we take on f3. Queen takes, and f5, and now we are ready to go with the e4. If bishop goes back to f1, which looks very logical, now again we have e4, we're expanding, queen d1, and bishop c7. And again, all pieces of white are on the last rank, and the next move, queen d6 with a queen h2, checkmate isn't coming, rook is coming to e8. I mean, this enormous position for just one pawn, this is just incredible to get such position, so this is so good. So bishop takes on f5, white is trying to win another pawn. Now we go queen e7, but the main idea is to cover from the queen e6 check, and g6 in the next move is the move. So queen g4, trying to stop this idea, and still say that bishop e6 is possible. Now we play queen f6. And the main point after bishop e6, king goes to h8. Now f2 is a problem, e6 is a problem, so rook has to go to f1 to defend it. But after knight f4, bishop is again the problem on e6 and has to be moved. So here bishop goes back to b3, and pretty much all the pieces on the queen side are out of the game, and we are ready to continue attack on the king side. So h5, kicking the queen. And now after e4, black's attack is basically just decisive, or it is a threat of taking on h3, and yeah, checkmate on the h2 somewhere could be definitely there, and yeah, it's definitely tough to handle for white. So thank you so much for watching. That was it about the quick starter of the Italian game. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next chapter.